Hello and welcome to Can We Have Your Attention? I'm James Wickham, I'm a journalist and a broadcaster. Claire Coady is the founder of the Attention Practice. Hello!
Hi!
And this is a bit of a different episode, and I think it's going to be a fascinating one because we've done stuff already, haven't we, Claire, about news, topical stuff, what we're talking about, the kind of generalities. This is quite a personal episode.
It is.
You told me you wanted to do this, so tell me about ADHD and you.
Thank you, James. This is a personal episode, and it's not something I talk about very often. Only in the last couple of years have I started talking about it more, getting more comfortable talking to people about it. But I have ADHD. I was diagnosed as a child, but when I was diagnosed, the assumption was you grew out of it. I discovered you do not grow out of it, apparently. You just adapt. And sometimes, especially when you hit the world of work, your adaptations no longer work. And for me, that happened pretty quickly in the working world. And I was diagnosed in 2010 when I was about 27. And that diagnosis changed my life. It was at a time when not many people in the UK were diagnosed. I was put on medication pretty straight away. I was very, very lucky that the medication that I was put on worked pretty much right away. It still took about 18 months. But in that period, I started also getting much more serious about thinking about my own patterns, habits. I started noticing a lot more. And I started learning much more about attention, focus, and how to manage it, live with it, and adapt your life around it.
I think we should start really by just saying what it is, because I don't think I know. I know what it stands for. It stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
That's right.
Right? But what does that mean? I get all those words, but I don't necessarily get the meaning.
So it's interesting because when I was diagnosed as a child, it was separated into two things. So it was either you had ADHD or you had ADD. So they took out the hyperactivity part because there's a form of ADHD that is, I guess they call it now ADHD inattentive, right? So it's not that you're the kid that was zooming around the class, throwing things in the air, tapping your feet all the time. You were probably the one who was like daydreaming. My nickname was Space Cadet, right?
Right. Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it manifests differently for different people, but generally speaking, it's a slight difference in your brain, right? So it's now recognized as a neurodivergence thing rather than a learning difficulty, although it falls into that category a bit at school, and also rather than a mental health condition. It's not a mental health condition. It's just wiring, right?
Yeah.
And that wiring has a lot to do with the way that you process stimulation or lack thereof. So the big thing is that if you have ADHD, your brain, you have some challenges with things like dopamine and other neurotransmitter issues that mean that it's like you're understimulated all the time. The world is quite boring to you. And so boring's the wrong word maybe, but you're constantly trying to raise your stimulation levels to stay focused, right? So in some people that manifests as tapping or drumming, like the kid drumming in the back at school. In other people, it manifests as risk-taking behaviors, for example. And what you're trying to do is stimulate that sense of urgency in order to focus. And so you'll find things like people with ADHD do tend to gravitate towards careers or environments where you're constantly stimulated, or you're working under tight deadlines, or there's a lot of different things going on, or there's a lot of information you have to process because you're really good at dealing with those sorts of situations, mostly because that gets you to equilibrium and then you can function. Everything else is boring.
Well, I mean, on that note, we are in a few moments going to talk to a former colleague of mine, Dan Maudsley, who has got ADHD and a bit about the process in which that diagnosis came about. I just want to ask you before we go any further, where you think the link is between ADHD and the attention economy.
So this is a really interesting thing. The other side of ADHD, and one of the main things that psychiatrists look for when they're diagnosing it is hyperfocus. So it's not actually just that you're distracted or easily distracted. It's actually that you really, really can focus on things for a very long period of time and very, very, very minutely. And that's really interesting because it also exhausts you, right? Because you're then constantly exposing yourself to stimulation, to information, to activity, to the point where you've gone past the point of exhaustion. And that's when it starts hitting you. You become completely drained, completely depleted. And one of the things that we've talked about over the weeks, I think, particularly as we've been talking about in the first episode, attention, and then in a previous episode about digital news, online news, and kids' well-being, is that feeling And that feeling is what ADHD people live with and manage all the time through a combination of medication, but also lifestyle changes and adaptations to help them cope with it.
I mean, it is a fascinating subject, and one in which we can probably learn a huge amount, not least about coping with the amount of things going on. Yeah. But shall we then hear a bit from Dan?
Yes, I think that's great.
So, Claire, you've given us a really brief overview of what's happened with you. So just tell us a little bit more then about the kind of effects that had and the changes since diagnosis, really.
So I mentioned briefly that I was first diagnosed as a child. And then, I was diagnosed as a time and a place where not only was ADHD considered to be a children's issue, but it was also considered to be something you grew out of. And that being in the workplace and noticing, the fact that I just, whatever I was using to cope in school or at university just wasn't working anymore. That's what led me to seek the diagnosis again. And it was quite early on, like so early, in fact, that virtually no one knew what ADHD in adults was. It was really, really hard to find someone to do the diagnosis. There was a waiting list then too. And then being on medication, I'd never been on medication before 2010. When I was a child diagnosed, I was swimming a lot. So I was almost naturally, there's a reason Michael Phelps has ADHD and is a swimmer. It's rife in sports like that. And you can't do that as an adult. You can't swim 4 hours a day. You can't swim off your ADHD. You also can't choose everything you get to do. So being on the medication suddenly made me both aware of what my life was like, but also where my brain was trying to go. It slowed it down just enough for me to be able to start intervening a little bit, but it still took effort. So one of the things I learned very quickly in that was thinking about when my brain was more or less susceptible to distraction. And also when it was more or less able to focus. I just became much more aware of not just what I wanted to focus on, but also how to stop it a little bit, not completely, but a little bit. I also became much more aware of how much my general environment and mood, and there's a great book called Feminism and ADHD, which I bought last year, which talks about the effect of hormones on ADHD, and then also general stress in life, how that might also affect my ability to concentrate, pay attention, focus, and what I need to do in the rest of my life while those things were happening in order to stop, I guess, the worst side effects of both medication and then having ADHD.
When you mentioned that you wanted to talk about your ADHD and how that applies in the world that we live in and in this attention economy, I immediately thought of somebody who I used to work with, and Dan Maudsley is his name. Hello, Dan, by the way.
Okay. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
Hi, Claire.
Dan and I used to write the summaries for 5 Live when such a thing existed. And Dan, we literally sat next to each other writing the summaries. Do you want to just go through a bit of the process of how that happened pre your diagnosis? Because
I'm so excited about this.
It was fascinating.
So I think pre my diagnosis, I would scare the bejesus out of people. So one thing that's great about writing news summaries, if you've got ADHD, is you've got a very, very definite deadline, which, and they're frequent. They're every half hour, It's almost perfect. 20 minutes would probably be better. But half-hourly deadlines is great for ADHD. But the way my activity would happen, it wouldn't look like, I think most people would approach that job as a kind of probably quite, steady activity, then have some sort of buffer between the time the summary was actually meant to go out, and so that everything was done, and then you were quite relaxed going into the studio to deliver that summary. I think my sort of approach would either be I'd get very excited about something and probably do what should be an hour's job in 29 and a half minutes and squeeze it all in and produce some epic news summary and be dashing into the studio, leaving sort of people ashen-faced behind me who'd been on this sort of white-knuckle ride of wondering when on earth this summary was about to appear. Or it would kind of be sort of pootling around for 20 or more minutes and then pull this news summary, kind of almost seemingly from nowhere. It would have been percolating, but no one's really aware of that. And then just pull it from behind seemingly and get in there. And this, I think, would induce sort of wonderment, but also deep frustration. And
everyone
probably
who's ever worked with me can
quite a lot
sympathize
of
with this.
quite a lot of resentment, I suspect, as well.
I mean, I have to say, from my perspective, so I loved working with you because I never quite knew what was going to happen, and most of the time you were the most laid back, because obviously I had no idea what the situation was, and I just felt like it was the most laid back person I'd ever dealt with, who suddenly at 5 minutes to the hour would go mad. And that was always, I thought, entertaining. But there were definitely people we worked with who found it unbelievably irritating.
There would be people who would be the polar opposite of that personality type, would find that deeply frustrating. Yeah. Yeah, there are many routes to a finished product. Not everyone would choose ours, but yeah. And of course, being unmedicated, I was also sort of blissfully unaware of kind of the effect it would be having on other people. So, yes, it was quite an interesting place to be.
Can I ask you then, because I don't know this story, what happened to make you go, something's wrong here?
I mean, this happens with a lot of people who eventually end up seeking diagnosis, like the wheels come off. Right. So I think I'd held things a lot, together quite well in various sort of helpful and unhelpful coping mechanisms. But I think definitely having children, I think by the time I got diagnosed, I had my second child, and the informal, I didn't even know there were coping mechanisms weren't working, and I didn't know why they weren't working, and life just seemed to be falling apart. And, when it goes, it's like home life goes, work life goes, social life goes, it all goes together. So, you're just kind of going, what on earth is happening here? I'd be turning up late for work because I wasn't organized enough at home. I'd be coming back from work completely spent, so I couldn't really do much at home. It was, it wasn't good. And thankfully, my wife pointed to me one day to a website with a list of ADHD symptoms on, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, there we go.
There you go. That's all of those things.
And it just happened that day I booked an appointment with a GP, and either the next day or that evening, I was back in work, and Rory Bremner walked past my desk, and I knew he'd done a whole load of stuff with Radio 4 about ADHD, so I just sort of collared him. And we chatted about ADHD, and it was kind of like, all right, this is what it is. There we go.
I remember him doing that, actually, because it was the first time I think I'd heard anyone in public life who wasn't American speaking about ADHD. And probably the first 10 years after my diagnosis, I didn't tell anyone. Like, my parents knew. I don't even think my dad knew. My partner at the time knew. A couple of friends knew, because they all had to adjust when they would meet me. They used to say we were meeting half an hour earlier than we actually were.
Oh, that one, yeah.
And then when I started the medication, I would turn up on time. This is unexpected.
Yes.
So only they knew, no one else knew in my life. And then when Rory Bremner started talking about it, it felt like the floodgates opened a little bit in the UK at least. But even then, most people don't know I have it.
Would you say, Dan, that your condition in any way was exacerbated by the job that you and I did? Because let's be honest, I mean, I look back on it now, I think most people would regard it as idiotically, stupidly pressurized, right? Every 27 minutes, really, because you've got a 3-minute bulletin, you've got to write a whole new 3-minute bulletin, which is mad.
Honestly, that bit of it for ADHD is great. You've got the clear deadlines. Also, the things that stress people out turn the ADHD brain on. So it's like, time is running out, so time is running out. Brilliant. All my synapses are suddenly firing. Oh my goodness, there's this huge breaking news story, and oh goodness, we've got to throw everything out. Brilliant. I'm like fascinated. And again, all the synapses are firing. So all the things that other people find very stressful are the things that, like, oh, I'm zen, this is great. Which is also another thing, communication, where people are looking at you like you're insane, kind of like, why are you just so chill? What I realize now was not good at all with the hours. So at the time, because it was a 24-hour operation, we would be working early shifts, late shifts, day shifts, night shifts. And that was a huge problem for me. I now know. I mean, coming off night shifts, I would just be this zombie, and it would take me days to readjust, and then I'd come back and do a whole different set of shifts. And yeah, my life being up and down and inside out all over the place, that was not helping at all. And that was one of the things, along with medication, that changed. We changed very quickly through HR at work that I can't do nights, and gradually I've kind of got into a more settled sort of work pattern that's, helped massively.
Now, you're quite a few years on, we should say, from where you were. Do you feel like you can just manage as a normal human being now? And I don't mean saying that as a ridiculous thing, but like stress is there for everybody, isn't it? Like stuff happens in life. It's always hard.
Honestly, stress is an unusual thing. I mean, I've even times when I have actually been properly stressed, I've not even known it. It's one of the slight issues is you're just not in tune with yourself. So I've been, having like seriously physical symptoms of stress, and then I'm a bit like, oh, I wonder if is that stress? Is that what that is?
Is that just how it's supposed to be?
Yeah. So look, the more complicated life is, the more things you're juggling. So the more you can sort of straighten out your, make life straightforward. And I often find I kind of see work as that's the simple bit because it's in a sandbox. Life is much more complicated and harder. I can pretty much deal with anything at work, especially as you leave and it's gone, until you go back again. But it's outside of work that everything's much harder, much more complicated.
And how do you find the medical side of stuff now? I don't mean personally, but just in terms of your experience of getting that diagnosis in the first place. I mean, you said that your wife had kind of shown you this sign of all these kind of symptoms that you had. Do you think those symptoms are well known now? And do you think most, in your experience, is the care there for people who are exhibiting such kind of symptoms?
On the NHS, not really. I saw an NHS GP and I've never had a bubble burst more quickly. I was sort of, certain that, I'm finally on this path to something. And my first interaction with the GP on it wasn't great. I then found a brilliant private psychiatrist. They were fabulous. And, I got the diagnosis and luckily managed to then get shared care with my GP, not the original one I'd seen, who was very dismissive when I spoke to them about my private diagnosis. Thankfully, there was another GP at the practice who was a bit more enlightened. And I've kind of not had any major issues sort of going forward with that. I still have to see a psychiatrist privately for annually, but sort of month to month, it's all managed through my GP, which is great. And it's not an experience that a lot of people now have of finding all sorts of problems getting a shared care agreement if they have had a private diagnosis, and getting an NHS diagnosis is almost impossible. It takes years. And
it was impossible for me too.
Yeah.
It was virtually,
and as I say,
in 2010,
usually by the time you're looking for a diagnosis, you're kind of at some sort of crisis point. So the idea of even waiting months, is not right, but it's years now. It's years.
And even at the time, I had diagnosis as a child. I had my school report cards. Like, I had everything. All I had to do was take it to the I did get a private psychiatric referral. Just took it to them and they looked through it and went, yeah, that's you. I've never, ever had that experience before. And then going back into the shared care agreement, you can have everything in order and they'll still go, but is this real?
Yeah.
Really? You? Like, you have a master's degree. How can you have ADHD? It's like, well.
My final question really is around the life that you have now. I know which job you do. I was, 3 desks away from you until the summer. It's still stressful. It's still painful. But you say you can manage that, and that's no problem.
Honestly, it's not. And I feel terrible because I know people find it stressful. But this is why it's great to have neurodiverse people as part of a team. If the world was run by neurodiverse people, I'm not sure I'd really... I dread to think what the consequences would be. But equally, if the world had no neurodiverse people, it wouldn't be a great place. You want people who are neurodiverse in your team because they will react differently. And, sometimes that's really useful. Someone who is very calm in a crisis, great. But equally, someone who will get on with a mundane task when it's not, sort of high adrenaline stuff. Brilliant. Have those two people because they are the yin and the yang. A team of all of one or all of the other is not great, but it's really useful to have that mix.
It's interesting hearing you describe the job because so when I was diagnosed, I changed careers and I went to work in advertising because I could see those were all people with ADHD. That one, it was, and I remember reading as well, like you seek out environments where you feel constantly like you're in an emergency, right? So, A&E, lots of people with ADHD apparently, kitchens, and then advertising, and advertising runs in this world where there's a lot of neurodiverse people in the creative teams, in the strategy teams where I come from, and also, in accounts, but it's also full of people who have to keep the ship together. And I just felt intensely sorry for those people my whole career, because whether you're medicated or not, it's just really hard. But I found it interesting when you said, it's a really just thing. Do you think that's part of what attracted you to that role, or do you think it's the other way?
I think, to turn up to work each day, it's got to be something you're fascinated in and love or enjoy or sparked by, I'm constantly in awe of friends who sort of did the same degree and things like that, and then went and did mind-numbingly dull but very lucrative jobs.
I was a tax advisor.
I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I wish I could, because it would, I'd be in a very different situation. But you've got to do something you love, and breaking news, journalism, interviewing people, sort of unraveling complicated issues and mysteries, and all of that. Love it. And it's so different each day, which is quite helpful. Similar to the A&E thing, bring me the next emergency.
So that was Dan Maudsley. He is a very, very lovely man. I should point that out now. And I'm not just saying that because he agreed to come on the podcast, but he's a very, very fine chap.
Our first guest.
Our first guest on the podcast. We hope to have many more.
Yes.
And Claire, I just wanted to ask you what you made of what Dan said and how that reflects on your own diagnosis, your own experience with ADHD.
My own experience was that, I gravitated towards an environment very similar to that. Working in advertising, I think particularly working in the creative end, is very similar kind of environment, right? Particularly if you work on new business, you're working to a very tight deadline. You are having to produce brilliant work, or hopefully okayish work at least, very, very quickly, get it over the line. It's very, very high pressured, and it can feel really rewarding, but it can also be completely draining and take a huge toll on your family, your friends, and yourself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had so many days where I remember one pitch I worked on, I got 4 hours of sleep or something, maybe even less, came back in, worked on the deck, got on a flight to Amsterdam, got to Amsterdam, the deck wasn't done. So my boss and I were working until the pitch was at 9 a.m. I remember at 2 a.m. I must have passed out on my laptop because I remember my boss shaking me awake going, are you okay, Claire? Do you need coffee?
Yeah.
If he's watching, sorry. Thank you.
No, well, you just approached that point, hadn't you?
Yeah.
And I think when Dan was talking about routine, that to me really struck a chord as well, as somebody who craves routine after years of shift work.
Yeah.
That actually, that must be something that's really changed for you as well, just making sure you have a set system.
And it takes every ounce of my being to keep to it as well, because, when you're talking about it, and Dan was as well, you had to get to a crunch point to do that where the desire to have it overwhelmed everything else, right? Because the one thing people with ADHD really enjoy is change. The reason we're good at this stuff is because we're good at ambiguity, we're good at crises, we're good with things changing because change is stimulation, right?
Yeah.
New things are new things. It keeps the dopamine going. But that's what leads to burnout. That's what leads to exhaustion. And having to keep a handle on that is really hard. So for me now, I'm going through a period at the moment where I'm engaging in something I call sleep militancy.
Right.
My bedtime routine starts at 9, and I'm aiming to be asleep by 11:30, but that routine is very regimented, and there's things that have to happen in it. And that's the only way I'm going to sleep 8 hours or whatever. But it's totally essential for me functioning in the day as well. If I don't get it, everything else falls off a cliff. So
that's fascinating. We should obviously do an episode about sleep because I think we're both sleep deprived. Look, just as a final thought, what do you think people like yourself with ADHD can teach those who don't have ADHD about the role of attention?
So that is, as we've been talking about this, that's just really come out strongly for me. I think particularly hearing younger people talk about the way that they're trying to cope with all this information coming at them. one of the things that social media algorithms prioritize is those extreme sensations and those extreme reactions, which I've talked about before. And people with ADHD have been seeking that out in every area of their life, probably their whole life, right? But then you also start to recognize, hopefully, especially with medication, what that does to you and what you need to do to stop it. So for people with ADHD, that particularly looks like hyperfocus, and knowing when to stop is really, really, really challenging. And sometimes personally, what I found is that putting time limits on things, right? Like I'll even set timers. So I know if I'm going to do something that I'll get absolutely lost in, I'll have at least something that prods me to get up and do something else, or, to take a break so I don't completely blow my own mind. At the end of it. And then also becoming aware of your fight or flight response. So with people with ADHD, this is a really big thing, right? So that seeking constant stimulation means you're seeking stress. But when you're stressed, your fight or flight response gets activated a lot more easily. And I think the polarization that we see online might be a little bit of that, right? Okay. So one, being aware that that's what that is, right? It's fight or flight. It's a stress adaptation. It's meant to be there for good things. Like if you're attacked by a tiger, it is not meant to be used 16 times a day in your life. I think one, being aware of it, and then two, for me, going box breathing. We're going to stop doing this is quite good. But I think a wider awareness that, this isn't just confined to people with ADHD, that this is a response that can end up being stimulated and ingrained as a habit is now probably something that everyone will face, not just people who experience ADHD.
It has been an incredibly interesting and informative program. Thank you very much, Claire. Appreciate it.
Loads of stuff in the show notes as well.
There'll be loads of stuff in the show notes. A reminder, if you want to get in touch with us on the email, you can do. It is canwehaveyourattention@protonmail.com.
That's right.
All thoughts, all comments, all insults, welcome. And
you're soliciting insults.
Well, it's just nice to have some response sometimes. So there we go.
That inbox.
Oh yeah, no, good point. Yeah, don't send Claire nasty things. I'll send you my personal.
Don't.
I mean, if you need to send nasty things, just I'll send you my number. Right, okay, Claire. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure, James. Thanks so much.
Speak to you soon.
Bye.